Welcome to Huddle Up with Matias Bueno. Taking it back to Duval County, we have former Jacksonville Jaguar and current host of the Lineman Life podcast, as well as his own YouTube channel, Uche Nwaneri. Uche, thanks for being on the show today, man. It's a great pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
The NFL playoffs have been absolutely wild, maybe not in terms of super exciting close games as there have been blowouts. A real crazy turn of events in the Bills game in particular, where they slaughtered the Patriots, playing the first perfect game that we'd seen since 1950. Do you really think that the Bills are a legit team that can go all the way? Or was it the elements that they used to help exploit the Patriots at home and finally be able to get over the hump of all the years of treachery that they experienced against Bill Belichick and the Pats?
Yes, I do think that the Bills are legit. I think that they are a powerhouse team in the AFC. I think that win over New England kind of solidified them as the class of the AFC East. And now that they've kind of gotten over that hurdle, they can redirect their attention to the ultimate goal, which is obviously to win a Super Bowl championship. But that comes after a long time of struggling between, New England, Miami, and Buffalo. Buffalo usually being at the bottom side of the division. Years of struggling through that after in the early 90s, going to 4 Super Bowls in a row. That is kind of, now we have a reinvigorated Buffalo fan base, reinvigorated franchise over the last, 3 to 4 years with Josh Allen. I would say that they are a contender to make it to the Super Bowl. They absolutely are a contender because they've proven that they have a specific style of play that works for them. Now the problem, the double-edged sword of that is that that is Josh Allen, and Josh Allen pretty much alone by himself. So they are in a position where if they're not able to have success with Josh Allen, then it really does kind of shut down that team's ability to produce on offense. We saw that a couple of times during the season where they went through a little bit of a funk because just Josh Allen was being held in check. So while it is an incredibly difficult thing to do, definitely is something that if you can do it as an opponent, then you can gain a particular advantage over the Bills.
Just like people watching film of the Jaguars defense dominating the Bills and watching Joe Cullen dial up blitzes left, right, and center. That to me has to be one of the most shocking games, and not even from the perspective of a Jaguars fan, but one of the most shocking upsets in recent history, and for sure the most shocking upset this year, maybe besides some of the Detroit wins that they had, you could argue. Was it really that the Bills just played awful, or did the Jaguars play way above their expectations and they had this potential, but they just weren't consistent with it?
Honestly, that's still the question that a lot of people are asking today. I don't know that we necessarily know for sure if it was one or the other, but I'm more inclined to believe that it was a mix of the two. I think that, like any team in the NFL, any team can win on any given Sunday. That is the mantra of professional football. So on that day, there is still talent on the field that is for professional levels. So having a day like they had beating the Buffalo Bills in Jacksonville, it's probably not something that's likely to happen many times if you play them over and over again. But in that specific timeline, they were able to pull it off. It was a great defensive effort by Joe Cullen. I had Joe Cullen as a defensive line coach when I was a player in Jacksonville. So I got to see how he worked with our defensive lineman firsthand. He's a very intense guy. And guys tend to gravitate to play hard for him because he does really motivate his guys to do their best. And of course, you have the Josh Allen versus Josh Allen matchup that week too, which I'm sure kind of added a little bit of spice to things. It added a little bit of a interesting, fascinating facet to the game. And with that, Josh Allen had his best game of his career, and then Josh Allen had his worst game of his career. So it was it kind of felt like one of those games that was just kind of destined to happen. By about halftime, you felt like the Jags really had a chance at holding on to it. So it was, just happened to be the perfect storm.
And as a member of the Jaguars, you were on the team from 2007 till 2014. You were able to
Mm-hmm.
be a part of a handful of upsets, maybe towards the latter part of your career when the Jaguars weren't as successful as when you first were on the team. But what were some of the memorable games from your time in Jacksonville that still stick out to you to this day in terms of how much they meant to the team, what they meant across the league, and what it meant to you to be a part of it?
Definitely, just the whole experience of my rookie year, going to the playoffs, going into the divisional round. I still have memories of that I hold close because those were some of the best times in Jacksonville. But also we had some good runs early in the first 4 or 5 years of my career in Jacksonville. We went 8-8 one year, 7-9 one year, but we also won a rushing title with Maurice Jones-Drew in 2011. So that was something that obviously was a huge memory for an offensive lineman. And we had a couple of big wins. We had a big win against Baltimore on Monday Night Football. We had a number of different games that were crucial for us trying to make a push to the playoffs. My first 3-4 years, we were playing for something in December. We were playing to make the playoffs. 2010, we were 6-3. Same as I believe the Green Bay Packers, who'd end up winning the Super Bowl at that time. We were kind of the same kind of team at that time. And, we had a run that we were able to be a part of and try and compete towards getting to the playoffs that year. Didn't end up working out for us, but you can't ask to be in a different position. There's not a much better position to be in than to be playing in December for something, to have to attain something, to achieve something, to get into the postseason. And there's not a lot of, there's a lot of teams that aren't playing for anything by the end of, October. They already know that their season is done. So they just have to play out the rest of the year. So I had 1 season, 2 seasons that were like that, but those were pretty rough years. Those years were pretty rough to have those. So you got to take into consideration how important it is to, be playing for something at the end of the season. That means you're actually having a pretty decent year. So I take those memories with me.
And it's obviously hard to win football games in the NFL. Sometimes I don't think people realize how hard it is to win and how much game planning and time goes into each week. I remember speaking to Megan and Joe Schobert on my podcast earlier, and she was talking about, one day Joe's gonna have to write a book about how all these teams he's been on that, went winless and 1-15 and all these things, because even though people love to make fun of the Cleveland Browns or the Jaguars and say they're so bad, it still takes tons and tons of preparation just to be even ready for a football game at the NFL level. And people don't really see what goes on behind the scenes. Obviously, people love to see the clickbait on social media or coaches and players getting into dramatic scenarios. But when people, for example, the whole Antonio Brown, Bruce Arians thing, people first were writing off Antonio Brown saying he's crazy and he's this and he's that because of reputation. But Bruce Arians the other day gets fined $50,000 for hitting one of his players. The whole Urban Meyer situation in Jacksonville. You think NFL coaches are saints that are always motivational and like movie characters? I think you'd probably have something to say otherwise.
Yeah, no, I've seen scenarios play out like that before, during my career where a coach and a player get into an argument. I've seen, coaches, inadvertently be physical with a player in their anger and then, coming back at the end of practice and apologizing because they know that's just not, that's not the behavior that is expected of professionals. And, we all work extremely hard to be where we are as athletes, as professional athletes. And there's no reason to show that level of disrespect to anybody. Now again, like you never really know what's happening behind the curtain in every franchise, but generally, if there's issues, players, whether it's between players, whether it's between players and coaches, there's an effort that's made to reunify the team, reunify the group, get everything out on the table so that there can be a resolution to the situation so that we can reconnect as a group that is trying to achieve a certain goal. Those are the goals we set coming into training camp, and you're trying to move forward with accomplishing those goals as you move through the season. So, definitely there is, there's a view of it from public opinion, that from the court of public opinion, that, a lot of people will see something like an Antonio Brown situation and be like, oh, well, that's because of him. But at the same time, there's always more to it that you have to understand as well. Now, does that mean that Antonio Brown reacted in the correct manner? No. But that anger is coming from something that he feels was unjust towards him. Now, again, it doesn't mean that it has merit, but you do have to respect that he feels a certain way, and then you try to address it in the most logical and non-destructive way possible. And, I think that's where he went wrong, and he didn't address it in a non-destructive manner. He lashed out. He created a scene. He created a situation that took attention away from the team and put it on him. And that's where a lot of times his fallibility comes into play.
And that's what makes the scenario so tough, is because he releases information about what Bruce Arians did and said in texts. But then again, you're right, he didn't deal with it in the appropriate manner. So then it begs the question, well, who's really at fault? It almost becomes a scenario of what came first, the chicken or the egg, because you see now information coming out about that shows proof Arians isn't a saint behind the scenes. But at the same time, Antonio Brown has acted out in scenarios where maybe he could have been more professional. And like that saying goes, where there's smoke, there's fire.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, like, you look at a situation and you say, well, Bruce Arians, what is his motivation behind acting that way? Yes, it was inappropriate that he put his hands on a player, especially, in the way he did. But you can take an angle and look at it and say, okay, he's doing that to try and protect the team from getting penalized in that moment, which would be costly in a playoff game. On the other side of that, you look at Antonio Brown, and Antonio Brown's situation is not, oh, he's lashing out because he thinks that the team is being shorted because of situation X, Y, or Z. He's actually lashing out because he isn't getting what he wants to create a means to an end to something that favors him specifically, which is a selfish thing, which that is the difference between the actions and how you look at them. If you understand the dynamic, which is at play in both of them. One dynamic is for the individual, one dynamic is for the team. So, in a way, you see that there's still two wrongs, but they're not created equal.
Exactly. And part of that comes down to the culture of the team. Tampa Bay has had a resurgence after what is shocking, a fact that Tampa Bay, and still to this day, and even more so before Tom Brady showed up, had the worst winning percentage of any professional sports franchise in all of the major four North American leagues, especially when you consider how bad the Buccaneers were for the first 20 to 30 years of their existence, and being the team that had the longest losing streak to start an NFL franchise. You look at what Bruce Arians has done. He's had success in Arizona. He's had success for a long time in the NFL. That culture matters. And when that pertains to a topic that hits more home with the Jacksonville Jaguars, people saw what happened with Urban Meyer. And initially they were swinging for the fences on a guy that hopefully was going to be a blaze of glory or go down in flames. It unfortunately ended up being the latter. But then you look at the GM now and the fire Balky movement and the clown game against the Colts, which was very funny to see, but at the same time, that there's deep pain in there, and it is ironic. And I've seen mentions of people talking on Twitter of the only coaches in Jacksonville that had a winning record or that were close to, besides Tom Coughlin, was someone that you played for, Jack Del Rio. He's someone that's been well respected around the league. What are some of your thoughts on how Jack Del Rio handled the team when you were in Jacksonville?
Got a lot of love for Jack Del Rio. A lot of love and a lot of respect. He drafted me. And I think that a lot of the players on the teams that he coached had a lot of love and respect for him because he treated us like men. He's a guy who understood, the view of the player because he was a player himself for 11 years in the NFL. So there was always a level of shock that we had that still, when we talk about it, a lot of guys who were on that team were shocked that Jack got fired. Like, I always say, fan bases don't understand how good they have it with the coach that can keep you relevant throughout the season. You don't understand how much that means until you're not relevant anymore. And that was the last year of relevance for the Jaguars when they fired Jack Del Rio. So For me, to watch him go and be a defense coordinator in Denver, then go and be a head coach in Oakland and take them to the playoffs when they were the Oakland Raiders, and then go to, I believe now he's in Washington with the football team as a defense coordinator on a defense that really has had a very good past couple of years. They're still building, but they've had some good times. And, this season was a little bit of a mix, but Jack has done well. Even before that, he was defense coordinator or defensive coach with the Baltimore Ravens as well. And, the mentality and the culture that he set in Jacksonville as a Jacksonville head coach was extraordinary. A lot of guys felt very comfortable in Jack's system because he found a good balance of demanding your best, but also not taking it to a point where it's running you dog or dogging you out or running you ragged. You're able to recover. You're able to be able to have fun in practice as well as, be serious at the same time. So definitely was a coach that was very well liked, and never going to say anything bad about Jack.
I long for the days as a Jaguars fan and someone that grew up following the team when he would always wear that super swaggy leather jacket with the logo on the sideline. That to me is like an iconic look that only really he pulled off well. It's almost like how Tom Landry and some of the older coaches, Vince Lombardi, would wear the long overcoats and the fedora hats. But, Jack Del Rio in his leather jacket was something else.
Yeah, leather jacket was one of his MOs, but also the first game of every season, every first home game, he would wear a suit. He'd wear a suit as in an homage to the old school, the old guard of NFL head coaches like Vince Lombardi, like Tom Landry, guys who would wear suits as if they were at a business meeting to coach their football team. So that was another thing that players would look at and say, hey, that's pretty cool. That's somebody who understands the history of the league he works in, who understands and respects it. So, when you have a guy like Urban Meyer come in and he has no real respect for how the culture of the NFL itself has grown throughout history and why it's so different from collegiate football, he had no respect for that, and that drove him to make decisions that really, spelled his own undoing. But at the same time, it also created a very big problem for the franchise, which can't be ignored. And I think that part of the problem with that is that a guy like Trent Baalke was part of the decision brain trust that brought him in. So, when you look at that and you look at what he's done in the draft with, especially with the 2021 draft, which, okay, you can't screw up Trevor Lawrence. You can't screw up that pick. Everyone knew that was an assumed pick, but what did he do with the rest of that draft? Not much. And they had a lot of picks. So, at the end of the day, I say, if you're going to do a reset, you have to reset it truly, which means you have to get rid of everybody who is in a decision-making position. And if you can't do that, then you're just prolonging the misery for your fans and for the players. And at a certain point, something's got to give. So, that's just how I see it.
It's interesting that people will point to the Jaguars and say, well, they have the most dysfunction or they're the worst and all these sorts of things. But you look at around the NFL, the Giants, since their last Super Bowl win, have one winning season, the same number as the Jaguars do in the same amount of time, which people now, Joe Judge is blah, 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 and Dave Gettleman, all these things. But it wasn't until this year, and then he started doing the copycat, clown movement with the Jaguars, saying, "Oh, this team is so terrible, and we expect better." But at what point does it really change for Jacksonville? Because the unfortunate reality is, Shad Khan can't be ousted if he's the owner, and he's not going to sell the team if they're making him money. But no one can really force him to make the team the highest priority of the other investments that he's involved in until it hurts his investment. And we don't know how long that'll take, but we as fans just have to, or people who follow the team or want the best for the team, whether it be alumni, media members, whoever, you're right. There has to be a real full reset. I remember seeing Shannon Sharp say that on, I think it was First Take or Undisputed several years ago after Blake Bortles was released in 2019, Shannon Sharpe was like, they need a reset. And I was like, the man is a Hall of Famer. He's a Super Bowl champion. He knows what he's talking about. And if he's saying it, and if everyone else is saying it, why don't the owners do it? That to me is one of the greatest questions.
Yeah, no, you're 100% correct there. And that's what I think has caused such a pushback from the Jaguars fan base, is that, you know, this is not resetting it. Like, there is too much damage that's been done to the franchise in one season by one group of decision makers. And at the end of the day, if you really truly want to make sure you get this right with Trevor Lawrence, you have to get those decision makers out of the building. They have to be gone. You have to purge it. You thought that you got this right. Shad Khan said it loud and clear when he hired Urban Meyer. I got this one right. Well, no, you got it spectacularly wrong. You got it historically. Maybe, I mean, I don't think that there's so much of an argument in saying that Urban Meyer is the worst head coach hiring decision that's ever been made in the history of the NFL. I think that's a fair statement to make. So if you're looking at that situation and that decision, and you're saying to yourself before any of this unraveled that you were convinced that wholeheartedly that you got this decision right, to watch it literally explode in unbelievable fashion and go down the way it did, if you cannot look at that and have a pit in your stomach and at even the sight of the people who were involved in this, in the calamity that was the 2022 season, then you don't really care about the team if you can't look at that and feel sick to your stomach and think that I need all of these people gone. Because look, when Jack Del Rio got fired, he was being fired because he went multiple seasons where we did not finish the season strongly enough to get into the postseason. That happened 3 years in a row. 3 years in a row that happened. They fired him. They got rid of the entire coaching staff. So that was lesser of a destructive train wreck than what we have here. And you still think you need to keep the general manager. Dave Caldwell was released halfway through the season before. Before that, you had the man who shall not be named, Gene Smith. He was the worst general manager that you could have ever had for a professional football franchise at that time. I watched that man brick by brick tear apart a 2-round playoff team and reload it with half the talent, with none of the experience. And that was a disaster. So at the end of the day, if you're going to reset things, you cannot do this halfway. You have to go all the way in and reset it completely. Get a new head coach, new general manager, get the head coach, let the head coach pick a general manager that he likes, that he can work with, and you start to build from there. Right now, you have an extremely critical moment in your number one overall pick's career coming, and that will be his second season of play. And if there is not significant growth, then you can bet your bottom dollar that, one, you're going to be drafting a quarterback within 4 years of that again, because he's not going to re-sign with you, and he probably will go on to be a backup somewhere else for the rest of his career, thus making him a bust. And you're really not moving yourself beyond square one at any point throughout this entire endeavor. You've completely stumbled yourself backwards into the starting blocks every time. And I just, how long can you do that is the question that it keeps coming to my eyes or into my mind. So I can't understand why you won't make the necessary move to preserve the franchise. To me, it's not a hard decision to make.
I've seen some people circulating on Twitter talking about Adrian Wilson, Dave Caldwell, Byron Leftwich. That trio should be brought in to be the vice president of football operations they said that Dave Caldwell, that should be his position. And then the GM should be Adrian Wilson from the Arizona Cardinals. And then the head coach should be Byron Leftwich. I know people give Byron Leftwich a lot of flack when he left the Jaguars, especially because he was supposed to be a great, promising young quarterback. But even still, after all these years, he showed excitement for his interview dressing in the teal suit. And he definitely got a very raw deal at the end of his time in Jacksonville, but he still showed that enthusiasm despite the way it ended. And he's done pretty well considering that he was in a bad situation in Arizona and did well. And then came to Tampa Bay and has done well with allowing Tom Brady to open up. Tom Brady is obviously a great player, but Byron Leftwich's schemes have allowed him, and his coaching have allowed Tom Brady to open up and become a 5,000-yard passer, to lead the NFL and win the passing title at 44 years old. You're not even 40 yet. Could you imagine like adding another 5, 6, 7 years and then being the best at the hardest position in all of pro sports? There's some credit that goes to Byron Leftwich for that. And if he's brought back to Jacksonville, I think that that's at least a more level-headed and educated decision, even if it doesn't work out, than swinging for the fences on Urban Meyer, where we see before that college coaches in the NFL have a very tough time succeeding.
No, I think you're right on with that. I think Byron Leftwich is a great candidate to be, the Jaguars head coach. I also think that in a way, the timing is kind of bad to try and to make that happen right now, because if they're not going to outright give him the head coaching job right away, if they're not, targeting him, then what's his real incentive to come to Jacksonville? There's not really an incentive. He is the heir apparent for Tampa Bay as far as being an offensive coordinator and somebody who probably would have first dibs on a position as head coach for Tampa Bay. It would go to him. He is, he has the greatest quarterback of all time that he works with, and he has a Super Bowl championship, and they're making a run for a second one this season. So, why would you leave a situation that in the next 5 years could literally see you becoming the head coach of a potentially 2 or 3 time Super Bowl championship franchise in as many years? And, you are working with rosters that you have already had an extensive amount of time with. Like, you much rather become the head coach of a team of players that you already understand how they operate and understand how to get the most out of them, than to go to a team you used to play for as a player that really is lost at the moment. They have no direction. They have no true identity. They don't got anything going for them other than Trevor Lawrence, really. They lost James Robinson to an Achilles injury. That's going to change his trajectory of his career for the foreseeable future. Travis Etienne had a Liz Frank injury. That changes the trajectory of his career into the future. He's going to have a shorter career. It's not going to be nearly as explosive as he would have been without that injury. There's a lot of players who, would find it difficult to even, be incentivized to come to Jacksonville. So you're climbing a mountain if you go to Jacksonville, whereas you're already at the top of that mountain if you made that climb and sustained your dominance on top of that mountain if you're Byron Leftwich in Tampa Bay. So there's really not a true reason for him to be involved with that other than nostalgia, which you don't have much of because you only played 4 years there and they cut you on a Monday. I was there. So, I do appreciate and understand how good it would be for Jacksonville to have somebody like Byron Leftwich, but I just don't think that unless they're giving him that immediately with everything he wants, which I'm sure would include a different general manager, I don't think that there's a real incentive for him to come to Jacksonville.
You mentioned that you were there during the time that Byron Leftwich was cut because there was a bit of maybe a quarterback controversy, quote unquote, between him and Dave Garrard. Since Leftwich came first, for the listener is not aware, in 2003 he was drafted and then was there 4 years, 2007. And then Dave Garrard was brought in. I think Dave Garrard was originally taken by the Steelers or the Jets. I can't remember which team he was originally drafted by, but he came to Jacksonville, and sure enough, Dave Garrard took over. And even people were asking me today in my college program of sports journalism, like, oh, isn't Blake Bortles the best quarterback ever? I'm like, well, no, not in Jacksonville history. It's obviously Mark Brunell. And then people next up would probably say Dave Garrard. And you played with both. And for basically the rest of Dave Garrard's years in Jacksonville, you were there blocking for him. And what was that whole exchange like? And how did you see the trajectory of the team change when Garrard took over as a starter?
Just a totally different energy. I was a rookie when Leftwich was on his way out. And, in my little time in the preseason, they had me as a starter in one of the preseason games, and, it was with the starting group. So I got to block for Leftwich for, against Green Bay and Lambeau. And it was, it's a different experience than blocking for Dave Garrard. And I felt like there was, just a different energy that he brought at the time. And that's the energy of somebody who's hungry, somebody who wasn't handed all these, all the titles, who wasn't, the first round pick, I think the third overall pick or something like that. The chosen one, so to speak, for somebody like Byron Leftwich. He's a guy who was, David Garrard was a guy who was hungry, who worked his way up the ladder, like many of the, lesser looked at draft picks, and he earned his spot. And when you earned your spot through your abilities and through proving your production, your teammates will respect that. Your teammates will see that as something that is galvanizing for everybody to be able to, find a player to lead us forward. And Dave really represented that, and he played that way over the years as I was a starter blocking for him, and he had that mentality of a leader. And I would agree with you. I'd say after Mark Brunell, I would definitely say Dave Garrard, because the most success that we've had as a team, really, when you talk about a quarterback, he was a part of that success in his position as a quarterback. He was one who ran he had the quarterback draw on 4th and 1 against Pittsburgh in the wild card round that carried the game, that won the game essentially for the Jags. He picked up a good 30, 40 yards on that. So, he's been a part of the biggest moments. He threw the Hail Mary. They got caught. We beat, Houston with that. Like, that's like the only Hail Mary I've ever seen work as a player. So, he does have a chunk of Jacksonville history behind him specifically. So, there is a little bit more to look at there than what you would say Byron Leftwich did as a player. But again, I really feel like, a lot of people who look at the Jags and they see a guy like Blake Bortles and they say, oh, this and that. Well, Blake Bortles managed games well, but he was not he wasn't a quarterback who could change a game. And that's the difference between him and Dave. Dave could change a game with his legs, with his cleverness as a veteran, and with his arm, because he had a strong arm. So, Blake Bortles is cool to me, but it goes Brunell and Dave to me, 1-2.
And again, this is like, and there's no disrespect to Blake Bortles. I think he's still definitely up there, albeit there's not many other great Jaguars quarterbacks. And Blake also was a great guy off the field and is just a super, super good human being. But you're right. Dave Garrard could change games with his legs, especially in ones that counted the most. And Blake did have his great year in 2017, at least, having a.
Yeah, but other than that, it was literally like, I watched him throw balls into the dirt. A 10-yard pass would just drop into the dirt in one hop. And I was like, quarterbacks don't do that.
And it's weird when they drafted him that they were saying, well, he doesn't have a natural throwing motion. And I remember hearing that. I'm like, what? But he's a quarterback in football. Like, how is that possible? Like, how could you draft someone that doesn't naturally throw a football? Like, I don't. So again, obviously tons of questionable decisions have been made. And what is the past is what is the past. Dave Garrard, again, you're right. I'm glad you mentioned those two amazing plays. The Garrard's going to run for it and more. He's inside the 10, down inside the 10-yard line, and the Jaguars are going to run down the clock and kick a field goal. Or everyone's favorite, and the famous Gus Johnson call. And honestly, part of the reason why the Jaguars were in the forefront of my mind when I was in junior high was just hearing the Garrard steps up, fires Mike Sims Walker, knockdown. Oh, he got it. Unbelievable. Touchdown, Jags. What was that play like?
You got it
for that. Yeah, exactly.
It's funny. I was on the field for that. Yeah. We were in the huddle and everybody was kind of like, man, I do not want to go to overtime. I said, hey, I feel like something's about to happen. And we still got 3 seconds. I feel like something's about to happen. And we called our little Hail Mary play and we just ran it. And it felt like we were going to get it. It felt like we were going to get it. Dave threw the ball up. They only rushed 3 guys. So he had the time to step up and launch it. And, as a lineman, we're just kind of standing there watching. And then you see the guy bat the ball down, but you see it bat towards Mike Walker.
Mike Thomas.
Or Mike Thomas. I'm sorry, Mike Thomas. And you don't see the ball like go to the ground. You just see it, you just see him like kind of clutch down. And you're like, oh, we caught it. And we just, we went wild after that. It was definitely once in a career kind of thing, that happened. So we enjoyed it. Man. It was pretty amazing.
That play is still super exciting. And even though the season in 2010, unfortunately, didn't end the way that you guys would have wanted, still to have three of the most iconic plays in Jaguars history, at least since 2000, include Dave Garrard's scramble on 4th and 2 against the Steelers, Dave Garrard Hail Mary that's batted down to the hands of Mike Thomas, and then the number 3, which would also be in the same season, Josh Scobie's game winner from 59 yards away.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, the game winner, man. Scobie, on Twitter, every once in a while, we like cross paths and say what's up and stuff like that. And he was a great kicker for the Jaguars. And I remember that play because it was probably one of the hardest plays to block for, in my career, just because I had like 5 guys like running right up my chest, trying to push me back. So, but that was a legendary play. That's a play that's going to always be there for Jacksonville. So it was good to be a part of an era that had some good highs. Didn't have all the highs that we wanted, but we got some things accomplished. And we're able to, provide at least an entertaining time for our fans.
Yeah, it was a great time, at least by the standards of what we see now. But at the end of the day, you got to take it for what it is, because winning in the NFL is never guaranteed. It's really hard. And for some franchises, people look in New Orleans now and say they're great and this and that. But New Orleans went 22 years without a winning season between, I think it was 1980 and 2002. So that's a long time. Never take winning moments for granted. And I know that for teams or for fans of teams that are bad or have been bad or want to lose games for draft picks, yes, with some exceptions for generational players, it's worth it. But at the end of the day, I know people were saying, well, we hope the Jaguars lose to get the first pick. What difference does it make with how they've made their picks in the last few years? Let the season go out on a bang, beat the Colts, shock the league, turn the playoffs upside down. And that's what they did. And I'm really glad they did so, because it leaves a better taste in your mouth than if they had lost.
Yeah, no, I agree totally. I know that, people ask me about that going into the Colts game. And I'm like, if I was a player, I'd be insulted to even think of it from that perspective. These are our rivals. We want to destroy them. If we beat them, they won't make the playoffs either. Yes, we absolutely want to destroy them so that they don't make the playoffs. That would give me some solace over this season. So definitely was happy that the Jags pulled that win out. That was something that, even on my podcast, we argued and debated about it on the panel. And I said, hey, normally I would agree with you guys on this, but I know how the Jaguars as a franchise, how we view the Colts. We will take every swat. We will try to crush them every moment we get. We will try and do that. So I don't think that if there's one place that the Jaguars can win this game, it is in Jacksonville. That is for sure. So, they kept the streak alive.
And you also were there to witness one of the last losses the Jaguars experienced to the Colts at home. So I'm sure for even someone like yourself, reflecting back on your career, you definitely want to avenge that loss that you won't be able to get back as a player.
Oh yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
So Uche, we're getting towards the end of our time in today's episode. So I want to ask a few rapid questions to have a little bit more fun before we part for today.
Shoot.
Who was your favorite football player growing up as a kid?
Steve Young.
What was your favorite sports movie to watch still to this day?
Any Given Sunday.
Who do you think is the greatest offensive lineman of all time at your position? It could be left or right guard, to be more specific.
Larry Allen.
Okay, for sure. Like, there's no question. Like, that guy is, I would argue, honestly, that Larry Allen's probably one of the most underrated pro football players ever. Like he was amazing Hall of Fame.
Well, I don't
like,
think he's underrated. I think he's rated quite highly. He's revered as an offensive lineman in the NFL. Dude was a freak of nature. He could play any position on the line better than most players in the NFL. So definitely was a guy who did show a ton of athleticism, unbelievable strength, great awareness. Yeah, Larry Allen. I don't think he was underrated, but
maybe
definitely my favorite.
Maybe I should correct what I'm saying in terms of like when I talk with NFL, when I talk about the NFL with my friends or my peers, people don't talk about linemen that much, or some people don't know that much about Larry Allen. If you are in NFL circles, and of course Larry Allen is, if you see what he did at the Pro Bowl, it was like whatever 40 something reps on bench. Like, he's a monster.
He's a freak.
Who do you think was the funniest teammate that you ever had in Jacksonville?
Funniest teammate. Okay, this guy is going to be little known, but he was probably one of the funniest guys I've ever been around. Charles Spencer. He played what, I think 2 years with me. He was offensive tackle. He was hilarious. He was hilarious.
Who was your favorite coach during your entire football career, even including college and high school?
Oh man, I don't think I had one coach that I would just point to, but if I had to say one coach that definitely I'm connected with and I still talk to this day, would have been my offensive line coach from Purdue, Bill Legg. Great dude, awesome coach. Kind of developed that grit, that true grit that linemen have that you hear about. He was a guy who could develop that in any offensive lineman very well. Still talk to him to this day. Love the hell out of Coach Legg. And also Andy Heck. He's offensive line coach for the Kansas City Chiefs now, but he was my offensive line coach my entire 6 out of my 7 years in Jacksonville. So definitely have a lot of love and respect for him as well. Still talk to him occasionally as well.
And my final question for you is, who was your biggest mentor throughout your football career, whether it had been a veteran when you first arrived in Jacksonville, whether it have been, aside from the coaches you just listed as well, whether it had been a teammate?
I would say Vince Manuai. Vince Manuai was definitely my mentor as a player, as a professional athlete. He took me under his wing, taught me a lot about the tricks of the trade, how to, manage myself on the field. And he was just a good person all around. So definitely Vince. Rest in peace, Vince.
Rest in peace, Vince, and respect to him, and always condolences to his family for the great contributions he made playing for the Jaguars. And with that, Uche,
absolutely,
I want to thank you for having been on today's episode. It was super awesome to be able to talk Jaguars football with you and get to know a little bit more about your career, because one of the famous quotes that I remember hearing from NFL 2K when I played it on Dreamcast as a kid was this: offensive linemen are like the rowers on a Viking ship. They don't get much credit for what they do, but if they don't do their job, the ship ain't going nowhere. And as an offensive lineman, I want to acknowledge you for the great work that you do in the trenches when you're playing for the Jaguars, and how underrated of a position it is in the scope of professional sports, specifically within pro football.
Hey man, thank you. I appreciate you having me on. Very much loved the work you're doing, and I appreciate you bringing more exposure to what's going on with the Jaguars on a daily basis.
And thank you to the listener for enjoying today's episode with former Jaguars offensive lineman, host of the Lineman Life podcast and YouTube channel, Uche Nwaneri.